The name Alpha was a crown of fire and ice, a legacy forged in the blood of her ancestors. But for Ilara, in that frozen moment, it was nothing more than a shard of glass pressed against her throat. The voice that condemned her belonged to Lyra, the mate of her most trusted beta, a woman she had shared meals with, a wolf she considered a sister. Lyra's words, "We serve a new Alpha," were not a challenge. They were an execution. The collective gaze of the Silver Moon Pack, once a source of strength, now felt like 1,000 daggers pinning her in place. The cold mountain air burned in her lungs, thick with the scent of betrayal. In the space of a single heartbeat, she was stripped of her title, her family and her future, left with only the crushing, silent scream of a queen watching her kingdom burn from within. They had been her family, her responsibility, the very reason for her existence. Now their silence was a verdict, a collective turning of their backs that was more painful than any physical blow. As Ilara's eyes swept across the stoic, unforgiving faces of the wolves she had bled for, she felt the carefully constructed walls of the Alpha crumble, revealing the wounded woman beneath, the loneliness she had always kept at bay. A secret shadow in the heart of leadership now flooded every part of her being, vast and absolute. Comenta de dónde nos ves y suscríbete, porque esta historia apenas comienza. Ahora sí, continuemos. The command to leave hung in the air, an irreversible severing of a bond she thought was eternal. Her reign had ended, not in a blaze of glory, but in the quiet, contemptuous dismissal from those she loved most. The retreat was a blur of shame and disbelief. Every step away from the heart of her territory felt like tearing a piece of her soul away. She didn't run like a cornered animal. She walked with the phantom weight of a crown on her head, her back straight even as her world collapsed. The whispers followed her, a venomous current in the wind. Weak, unfit, broken. She could feel the predatory eyes of her former pack tracking her, no longer as their leader, but as prey. They were letting her go, but not out of mercy. They were exiling her to the unforgiving wilds, confident that the wilderness would finish what their betrayal had started. They had no idea of the ancient, volatile magic coiled in her blood, a secret power she herself feared, a terrifying storm waiting for the perfect, devastating moment to break. Days bled into a nightmare of survival. The wilderness that bordered the territories was a brutal, lawless place, a graveyard for outcasts and rogues. Hunger became a constant ache in her belly, and the chill of the night seeped into her bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. Her wounds, both physical and emotional, festered. The image of Lyra's face, twisted with a triumphant scorn she had never seen before, haunted her waking moments and her fitful sleep. This was her life now, a desperate scramble for existence, a ghost haunted by the life she had lost. The stoic Alpha was gone, replaced by a desperate survivor, fueled by a single, burning ember of rage. She was no longer a queen, but she refused to be a victim. She would endure, even if it meant becoming something monstrous. Her strength finally gave out at the edge of a dark, imposing forest. The air here was different, heavy with an ancient power and an oppressive sense of dominion. A creeping blight seemed to cling to the trees, their leaves withered and grey, and the very ground felt sick beneath her paws. She had stumbled across a border, a line she knew she shouldn't have crossed. This was Winterfang Ridge, a name spoken only in hushed, fearful whispers, the domain of the ruthless Alpha Kyle. As her vision blurred and her legs buckled, she collapsed onto the blighted earth. Just before darkness claimed her, a massive shadow fell over her, blocking the pale moonlight. A low, dangerous growl rumbled in the silence, the sound of a predator that had just found something intruding on its dying kingdom. Darkness did not bring peace, only memories. In the haze of unconsciousness, Ilara dreamt of her father's hand on her shoulder, the weight of his alpha ring, a promise and a burden. She remembered the day she took his place, the solemn vows she made to protect the Silver Moon Pack, to be their shield and their heart. She had tried to rule differently, not with fear, but with a quiet strength and a deep-seated compassion she believed was her greatest asset. She saw her people as a family, not an army, and she poured every ounce of her soul into their well-being. That was her fatal mistake. Her desire to nurture was perceived as an inability to command, her empathy as a crack in the armor of leadership. She lost her throne not because she was weak, but because she dared to love the pack she was meant to rule with cold authority. The loneliness of the Alpha's peak was a chasm she had navigated her entire life. Every decision was hers alone, every burden carried in silence. While others found solace in mates and the warmth of family, Elara found only the cold comfort of duty. She had long ago accepted that a true partner, an equal to share the weight of the crown, was a fantasy she couldn't afford. Romance was a vulnerability, an opening for an enemy to strike. Her secret, buried desire was for a hand to hold in the dark, a whisper of support when the world felt too heavy. But the betrayal had cauterized that fragile hope, turning it to ash. It confirmed her deepest, most crippling fear, that she was destined to be alone, not because of her title, but because the woman beneath it was simply not enough. Her current state was a cruel mirror to her internal ruin. The wilderness was as stripped and broken as her spirit. In her feverish state, she saw the ghosts of her ancestors, their legendary deeds a testament to a strength she now believed she never possessed. Her parents had been a perfect union, their love story a legend that bound the Silver Moon Pack together for a generation. She felt their disappointment like a physical blow, a shame that ran deeper than any wound. She had not only lost her future, she had irrevocably tainted their past, shattering a legacy that had endured for centuries. She was the broken link in a golden chain, a failure whose name would be whispered with contempt by generations to come, a cautionary tale of a queen who fell from grace. The faces of her betrayers were etched into the back of her eyelids, a constant, tormenting vision. Lyra, the woman she had laughed with over shared meals, and Liam, her beta, the male she had trusted with her life, stood as the architects of her destruction. She replayed their final conversation in her mind, searching for a sign, a flicker of the deception she had so blindly missed. There was none. Their loyalty had been a perfectly crafted illusion, a mask worn so long it had become their face. This was not a political maneuver. It was the ultimate act of personal rejection. It taught her a lesson more brutal than any blade. Trust was a currency for fools, and opening your heart was an invitation for it to be torn from your chest. She would never make that mistake again. Beneath the layers of shame and grief, something ancient and terrible stirred. The primal power coiled in her blood, a secret she had guarded with suffocating fear, now felt like a low, dangerous hum. It was a chaotic, untamed magic, a legacy of a wilder time that her ancestors had warned against. They said it responded to despair, that it fed on rage and pain, promising immense power at the cost of one's soul. As an alpha, she had spent her life suppressing it, terrified of the monster she might become. Now, stripped of everything, the temptation to unleash it, to let it burn her enemies and the world that had wronged her, was a siren's call in the depths of her despair. The thought of losing control was just as terrifying as the cold certainty of her own death. Her last conscious thought was one of surrender. Lying on the blighted, frost-covered ground at the edge of Winterfang, she finally let go. The fight had drained from her, leaving only a hollow emptiness. She had failed her pack, dishonored her bloodline, and lost herself. There was nothing left. The massive shadow that fell over her was not a threat, but an end. She closed her eyes, ready for the final blow, a merciful release from the agony of her existence. She did not have the strength to fight, nor the will to run. In that moment, she was no longer an alpha, no longer a queen. She was just Ilara, a woman broken by the world, welcoming the final, silent embrace of oblivion that she felt she so richly deserved, but death did not come. Instead, strong, unyielding arms lifted her from the frozen earth. The movement was not gentle, but it was surprisingly steady, a calculated display of power. She was being carried, her head lolling against a chest as hard as ancient stone. The air was thick with the scent of pine, winter chill, and an overwhelmingly dominant male presence that was both terrifying and strangely grounding. She was being taken somewhere, deeper into the heart of the dying lands. Why? Why would the ruthless Alpha Kyle, a name synonymous with brutal conquest, spare a worthless, dying rogue? The question echoed in the fog of her mind, an unsolvable riddle as she was carried into a future she never asked for. En este canal traigo las historias de romance más épicas e intensas. Cada semana, un nuevo mundo, una nueva pasión imposible. She awoke to the biting cold of stone and the scent of antiseptic herbs. The room was Spartan, carved from the mountain's dark rock, with a single, narrow window showing a sky the color of slate. Everything about the space spoke of grim functionality and a complete absence of warmth or comfort. It was a fortress, a prison, and a tomb all in one. A palpable sense of decay hung in the air, a subtle wrongness that went deeper than the chill. It was in the way the shadows clung to the corners and the oppressive silence that seemed to swallow all sound. This was the heart of Winterfang Ridge, and she could feel its sickness in her bones. She was a prisoner in a dying kingdom, a place ruled by an alpha whose reputation was as bleak and unforgiving as the landscape she now found herself in. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and he entered. Alpha Kale was not a man. He was a force of nature, a living embodiment of the harsh winter that defined his lands. Tall and broad-shouldered, with hair as black as a starless night and eyes the color of glacial ice, he moved with a predator's lethal grace. Scars marked his face and arms, not as blemishes, but as a testament to a life of brutal conflict. He wore no crown, no opulent furs, yet his authority was an almost physical presence in the room. A crushing weight that demanded submission. He didn't speak, merely stood by the door and watched her, his gaze sharp and analytical, stripping away her defenses layer by layer. It was the look of a wolf assessing potential prey, or perhaps a tool he was considering for a specific, violent purpose. "You trespassed on my land," he finally said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the stone floor. "Ordinarily, that would be your last mistake." He walked closer, circling the simple cot where she lay. "But my lands are dying. A blight, born of dark magic, is poisoning the soil, sickening my people, and turning my forests to ash. For generations, the Alphas of Winterfang have been the undisputed masters of this territory, our strength absolute. Now, we are being devoured from within by an enemy we cannot fight, a creeping death that mocks our power." He stopped at the window, his massive form blocking the pale light, casting her in shadow. The frustration and raw fury in his voice were tightly controlled, making them all the more terrifying. In that moment, as he stared out at his decaying domain, the iron mask of the ruthless conqueror slipped. Ilara saw a flicker of something else in his profile, a deep, gnawing desperation. He was a king presiding over a crumbling empire, a warrior facing an enemy that claws and teeth could not defeat. The weight of his pack's survival rested entirely on his shoulders, and it was a burden that was slowly crushing him. His ruthlessness, his iron-fisted rule, was not born of cruelty, but of a desperate, terrifying fear of failure. He was utterly alone in his struggle, a powerful alpha rendered impotent by a silent, invisible foe, and this hidden vulnerability was a wound far deeper than any scar he bore. He was a leader watching everything he was sworn to protect wither and die before his very eyes. His icy gaze snapped back to her, the moment of weakness gone as quickly as it had appeared. My shamans felt you the moment you crossed the border. Not just another pathetic rogue on the brink of death. They felt it, he growled, his eyes narrowing on her. The old magic, the primal connection to the earth that our bloodlines have lost. It's faint, dormant, but it's there inside you, a power that our legends say can command life itself, a power that has not been seen in 1,000 years. He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. You are an anomaly, an outcast alpha carrying a key to my pack's salvation within your very blood. I do not believe in fate, but I do believe in seizing opportunity where I find it, no matter how desperate. He offered no comfort, no words of alliance. His assessment was as cold and clinical as a surgeon's blade. She was not a person to him, not another alpha deserving of respect. She was a potential solution to his catastrophic problem, a last, desperate gamble. He turned and walked back to the door, his decision made. His back was to her when he spoke to the guards waiting in the hall, his voice devoid of any emotion. She is awake. Get her cleaned and bring her to the throne room. Immediately, the command echoed in the stone chamber, sharp and absolute. It was not an invitation to negotiate her future. It was a summons. To Ilara, weak and disoriented, it felt like the final walk of the condemned, a prelude to a judgment she was utterly powerless to escape. The guards shoved her forward into the throne room, and the heavy doors boomed shut behind her, sealing her in. The chamber was a testament to brutalist power. Carved from the mountain's black heart and lit by the cold, grey light filtering through high, narrow windows, a throne of unadorned ironwood and jagged stone sat on a raised dais, and upon it Alpha Kyle watched her approach. He was not a king holding court. He was a predator in his den. His council and high-ranking warriors lined the walls, their gazes a mixture of contempt, suspicion, and raw hostility. They saw a stray, a piece of filth, dragged in from the border. Ilara held her head high, the phantom weight of her own lost crown a source of defiant strength, and met Kyle's glacial stare without flinching. The air was thick with unspoken challenges, a suffocating tension that promised violence. With a dismissive wave of his hand, Kyle cleared the room. "Leave us," he commanded, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space. The council members and guards filed out, their reluctance a palpable force. But none dared to question his order. The great doors closed once more, leaving Ilara alone with the most feared alpha in the known world. He rose from his throne, not with haste, but with a deliberate, flowing grace that belied his immense size. He descended the dais and began to circle her, his steps silent on the stone floor. He was assessing every line of her, the way she held herself, the fire of defiance in her eyes. The great alpha of Silver Moon, he mused, his tone laced with a cold, mocking irony. Brought low by a snake in your own den, a tragic, predictable story. Si este tipo de historias te atrapan, suscríbete porque tengo muchas más. He stopped his circling and gestured toward a massive, arched window that overlooked the valley. "Come," he said, not a request but another command. She followed, her senses on high alert. From this vantage point, the full extent of his problem was laid bare. A creeping, grey decay spread like a cancer across the land. The mighty pines were skeletal, their needles turned to ash. The ground was cracked and barren, and a sickly mist clung to the valley floor, refusing to burn away even in the midday sun. "This is the blight," he stated, his voice a low growl of contained fury. "It is a curse, a dark magic that poisons the very soul of Winterfang. It sickens my people, weakens our wolves, and strangles the life from the earth. My strength, my armies, they are useless against an enemy that kills the world beneath our feet." His gaze remained fixed on the desolation outside, but his focus was entirely on her. "My shamans have searched for an answer for a generation. They found nothing but despair and grim prophecies. Then you stumbled across my border, a dying rogue carrying a miracle in your blood. He finally turned to face her, his proximity an overwhelming physical pressure. They say your bloodline carries the Earth Song, an ancient magic that commands life, a power thought to be lost to the ages, a power that can fight this poison. You are not just an exile, Ilara of Silvermoon. You are an antidote. You are the only thing standing between my pack and extinction, a weapon delivered to my doorstep by a cruel and desperate fate. I intend to use you." The air crackled with a sudden, shocking intensity as he closed the remaining distance between them. His icy eyes bored into hers, stripping away any pretense of courtesy. "I am offering you a pact," he declared, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous murmur that was for her ears alone. "A transaction. I will bind you to me. You will become my Luna, the alpha female of Winterfang. Our union, the joining of our blood and spirit, will anchor your power to this land. It will allow the Earth Song within you to flow into the soil, to wage war on the blight, and to heal my home from the inside out. You will be the queen of a dying kingdom, with the sole purpose of breathing life back into it. This is not a proposal of the heart. It is a contract of survival." He saw the shock and fury warring in her expression and pressed his advantage, his voice a cold, sharp blade. "Do not mistake this for a request for aid. This is an offer of mutual benefit. In return for your power and your title as my Luna, I will give you vengeance. I will lend you the full, undivided might of the Winterfang legions. My warriors will become your sword. We will march on Silvermoon, and you will personally tear the crown from the head of the usurper who betrayed you. I will help you salt the earth with the bones of your enemies and reclaim the throne that is rightfully yours. I am offering you the power to turn your humiliation into a legend of absolute, terrifying retribution. All you have to do is accept my terms and bind yourself to me." Ilara's mind reeled, the sheer, cold-blooded audacity of his proposition leaving her breathless. He was asking her to trade her body and soul to become a political and magical pawn in his desperate war. It was the ultimate objectification, viewing her as nothing more than a tool to be wielded. Her pride, the very core of her being as an alpha, screamed for her to refuse, to claw at his arrogant face and choose death over this gilded cage. Yet the image of Lyra's triumphant sneer burned behind her eyes. The whispers of weak and broken echoed in her memory. Alone, she would die a forgotten rogue. With him, she could become a queen again, a conqueror. It was a devil's bargain, a choice between her dignity and her destiny, and the cold, calculating part of her knew there was only one logical answer. A long, heavy silence stretched between them, the only sound the distant howl of the wind against the stone. Kyle watched her, his expression unreadable, waiting for her surrender. Finally, Ilara lifted her chin, the broken refugee momentarily vanishing, replaced by the indomitable will of an alpha. A cold, hard light entered her eyes. "I accept your terms," she said, her voice raspy but firm. Cutting through the silence like glass, a flicker of satisfaction crossed Kyle's face, but it vanished as she took a step forward, closing the distance herself. "I will be your Luna. I will heal your land. But I have one condition. This will not be a union of a king and his consort. It will be a partnership of equals. You will treat me as an alpha, not a prize, and I will have my own seat on your council with a voice equal to your own." There was no celebration, no ceremonial grandeur. The union took place in the bleak throne room, the same cold, unforgiving space where their pact had been forged. Ilara stood before the ironwood throne, dressed not in the silks of a bride, but in a simple, functional tunic of dark wool, a symbol of her status as an asset rather than a partner. Kyle stood beside her, a mountain of silent, controlled fury. His entire council and the highest-ranking warriors of the Winterfang pack lined the walls, their faces carved from stone, their eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and open contempt. They were not witnessing a marriage. They were observing a necessary, distasteful transaction. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and dying earth, a funereal atmosphere for a bond born of desperation and the promise of future bloodshed. This was not a beginning, but a solemn vow to wage two different wars. Kyle did not speak of love or companionship. His vows were a public declaration of their contract, a binding oath spoken to his people. "Before you stands Ilara of Silvermoon," his voice boomed, echoing off the cold stone. "An outcast, yet she carries in her blood the key to our survival. Today, I bind her to myself and to this land. She will be my Luna, her power an extension of my will. Her purpose will be to heal what has been poisoned, to restore the strength of Winterfang. In return, I have sworn an oath to lend her our strength, to make her enemies our enemies. This is not a union of sentiment but of necessity. She is a weapon for our salvation, and I will wield her to save us all." His gaze locked with hers, and in their icy depths, she saw not a husband, but a general claiming his most valuable asset for a desperate campaign. When her turn came, Ilara's voice did not tremble. It was clear and carried the innate authority of a true alpha. Cutting through the hostile silence, "I accept this pact," she declared, her eyes sweeping over the assembled court, meeting every contemptuous stare with unwavering defiance. "I will be your Luna, and I will pour my strength into this dying land. I will fight the blight that sickens your home, as if it were my own. But I am no mere weapon to be wielded. I am an alpha of the Silvermoon bloodline, and I bind myself to your alpha as an equal. My voice will be heard. My counsel will be respected, and the strength of Winterfang will march under my banner when I return to reclaim my throne. I give you my power, and in return I claim your loyalty for my war. This is our agreement." The ritual itself was primal and ancient, far removed from any civilized ceremony. One of Kale's oldest shamans, a withered wolf with eyes that seemed to see into the soul, brought forth a ceremonial dagger of obsidian. Without hesitation, Gale sliced his own palm, the dark blood welling instantly. He held it out to Ilara. She met his gaze and did the same, the sharp sting of the blade, a grounding reality in the surreal moment. The shaman guided their hands together, pressing their bleeding palms against each other. As their blood mingled, a palpable shock of energy coursed through Ilara, a jolt of raw, untamed power that felt like lightning striking deep in her bones. She could feel his strength, his rage, his desperation, and he, in turn, felt the wild, chaotic magic coiled within her. The air in the room grew heavy, crackling with a power that made the assembled wolves shift uncomfortably. "Seal the pact," the shaman commanded in a raspy whisper. Kyle turned to her, his expression unreadable. This was the final formality, the gesture that would make their bond absolute in the eyes of his pack. He leaned down, and for a heart-stopping moment, Ilara thought he would be rough, perfunctory, but his touch was unexpectedly gentle as his lips met hers. It was not a kiss of passion, but it was far from cold. It was a brand, a claim, a searing connection that sent another shockwave of energy through her entire being. In that brief, silent contact, the political contract dissolved into something far more dangerous. It was a spark of undeniable, terrifying chemistry. A promise of a fire that would either forge them into one or burn them both to ash. It was a moment that changed everything. A collective, uneasy silence fell over the court. The wolves of Winterfang had expected a cold, political gesture, but they had witnessed something else entirely. The raw energy that had flared between their alpha and the strange outcast was undeniable, a visible current of power that had unsettled them all. The nobles exchanged wary, calculating glances, their disdain now mixed with a new, sharper fear. What kind of power did this foreign female truly possess? Was she a savior or a siren who would lead their formidable alpha to ruin? A particularly ambitious noble, Lord Valerius, watched from the shadows, his eyes narrowed with a venomous envy. He saw not a Luna, but an obstacle, a usurper of a position he felt should belong to a true daughter of Winterfang, and in that moment a seed of sedition was planted in his heart. As they turned from the dais, their hands still loosely clasped, Kyle's grip tightened. He led her down the steps, his hand moving to the small of her back in a clear, possessive gesture for all to see. It was a public display of ownership, a silent warning to his court that she was now his girl and under his absolute protection. For Elara, the simple touch was a profound shock. The heat of his palm seared through the thin fabric of her tunic, a startling point of contact that grounded her in the terrifying new reality of her life. He was no longer just a rival alpha. He was her mate, her partner in this desperate pact. The weight of his hand was the weight of her new chains, and yet a traitorous part of her registered the feeling not as a threat, but as a strange, unwelcome anchor in the storm of her emotions. They were escorted from the throne room, walking through silent, stone corridors to the Alpha's private wing of the fortress. The guards stopped before a set of heavy oak doors, opening one to reveal a chamber that was as Spartan and cold as the rest of the mountain. Though furnished with a stark, brutal elegance, it was her new room, directly adjacent to his. "The Alpha will see to your needs," one of the guards grunted, before they both bowed stiffly and retreated, their footsteps echoing down the hall. The finality of the door closing behind them was deafening. For the first time since the ceremony, they were truly alone. The air was thick with the unspoken, charged with the lingering energy of their blood oath and the memory of that devastating kiss. They were a bound pair, yet they were more strangers than ever. Kyle broke the suffocating silence, his voice a low rumble that seemed to absorb all the warmth from the room. He did not look at her, instead staring out the narrow window at his blighted lands. "The pact is sealed," he stated, his tone all business, as if actively trying to erase the intimacy of the past hour. "At dawn, my shamans will escort you to the Heartwood. That is where the blight is strongest and where your work must begin. They will explain the rituals. I expect you to give everything you have to this. My pack's survival now rests on your shoulders. Do not make me regret this bargain." He turned, his glacial eyes meeting hers, devoid of any emotion. He was re-establishing the lines of their contract, reminding her that she was here to serve a purpose, nothing more. He was a king, and she was his unwilling last resort. He left without another word, the door closing behind him with a soft, definitive click. Elara stood alone in the center of the vast, cold chamber, the silence pressing in on her. She slowly raised a hand to her lips, the skin still tingling from the phantom pressure of his kiss. It was done. She was Luna of Winterfang, bound in blood and spirit to the most ruthless and powerful alpha she had ever met. The path to her vengeance now ran directly through his dying kingdom and his complicated, guarded heart. She felt a tremor of fear, not of the enemies in her old pack, but of the dangerous, magnetic man in the next room and the volatile connection that sparked between them. She forcefully pushed the feeling down, steeling her resolve. She would not be distracted. Del like si te enganchaste y suscríbete para más romances épicos. The days that followed fell into a harsh, demanding rhythm. Each dawn, Elara would journey to the Heartwood, the epicenter of the blight, accompanied by Kale's silent, watchful shamans. There, she would kneel on the poisoned earth, sinking her hands into the corrupted soil and channeling the raw, chaotic life force within her. It was an agonizing process, like pouring her own soul into a bottomless, dying void. The magic fought her, a cold, sentient malevolence that left her drained and trembling by dusk. Kyle never joined her. but she often felt his eyes on her from the high battlements of his fortress, a silent, unreadable sentinel watching his last hope wage a war he could not fight. His presence was a constant pressure, a reminder of the monumental weight of his pack's survival that now rested entirely upon her shoulders. One evening she returned to her chambers, so exhausted she could barely stand. The world was a grey blur of fatigue, and the thought of facing another solitary meal felt like a monumental effort. But as she entered, she found Kyle waiting for her. He stood by the hearth, a fire casting flickering shadows on his scarred face. In his hands, he held a simple, steaming bowl. He didn't speak, just pushed it into her hands. It was a rich, restorative broth, thick with herbs she recognized as potent healing agents. The gesture was so uncharacteristically thoughtful, so far removed from the cold warlord who had forged their pact, that it left her momentarily speechless. He simply watched her for a moment, his glacial eyes holding a flicker of something she couldn't name, before turning and leaving as silently as he had appeared. Her inclusion in the Winterfang Council was a condition of their pact, but it was a constant battle. Lord Valerius, a noble with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, became her most vocal opponent. In their first meeting, he openly questioned her methods, his words dripping with condescension. The Luna's Earth Song seems to be little more than a whisper against a hurricane, he sneered, his gaze sweeping over the other council members, who nodded in grim agreement. We are staking our future on the supposed magic of a landless rogue, an alpha who could not even hold her own territory. How do we know this foreign power will not poison us further? Every word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to remind everyone of her status as an outsider, a desperate tool brought in to perform a miracle she had yet to deliver. Kyle remained silent at the head of the table, his expression an unreadable mask of stone. His lack of immediate defense was a test, and Ilara knew it. He was watching to see if the alpha he had bound himself to still had teeth. Drawing on a reserve of strength she didn't know she possessed, Ilara met Valerius's gaze with icy calm. My hold on Silvermoon was lost to betrayal, Lord Valerius. Not weakness, a lesson you would do well to remember, she stated, her voice quiet but carrying an authority that silenced the murmurs. And my magic is the only thing standing between this pack and oblivion. If you have a better solution, I invite you to present it. Otherwise, your commentary is nothing more than the fearful whining of a wolf who would rather watch his home die than trust a new path. The conflict came to a head during a grim public ceremony meant to bolster the pack's morale. In the great hall, before the assembled warriors and their families, Valerius stepped forward. His voice boomed with righteous indignation as he pointed a trembling finger at Ilara. We are told to place our faith in this outcast, he spat, the word echoing off the stone walls. This broken alpha, this foreign witch who dabbles in forgotten magic, she weakens our great alpha with her strange ways. She is not a savior. She is a symptom of the very sickness that plagues us. The crowd stirred, their fear and desperation making them fertile ground for his poisonous words. Ilara stood beside Kyle's throne, utterly exposed. The collective weight of their suspicion, a physical blow that threatened to shatter her hard-won composure. In the suffocating silence that followed, Kyle moved. He did not shout or roar. He descended from his throne with a lethal grace, each step a thunderclap in the tension-filled hall. He walked until he stood directly in front of Ilara, turning his back on Valerius to face his people. He then did something no one expected. He gently took Ilara's hand, his grip firm and grounding, and raised it for all to see. Lord Valerius is a fool. Kale's voice was a low, dangerous rumble that carried to every corner of the chamber. He sees an outcast. I see the future of this pack. An insult to my Luna is a declaration of war against me. Her fight is our fight. Her honor is our honor. She is Winterfang now. Anyone who questions that will answer to me directly. The finality in his tone was absolute. Valerius paled. his arrogance crumbling into fear. Kyle held Ilara's hand for a moment longer, a silent, possessive claim before the entire pack. Then, without another glance at the shamed noble, he placed his hand on the small of her back and guided her from the hall. The warmth of his touch burned through her tunic, a stark contrast to the icy humiliation she had just endured. As they walked through the now silent corridors, her mind was a whirlwind of shock and a confusing, traitorous gratitude. He hadn't just upheld their pact, he had defended her. He had shielded her, not as an asset, but as his partner. The public display had irrevocably shifted their dynamic, forging a bond of loyalty in the fires of public defiance. Later, standing outside her chambers, the air between them was thick with unspoken words. The political tension had vanished, replaced by something far more personal and volatile. "Thank you," she finally whispered. Unable to meet his gaze, he simply gave a curt nod, but he didn't leave. He stepped closer, his presence filling the narrow hallway, and lifted a hand to brush a stray strand of hair from her face. His touch was brief, almost hesitant, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her. In that moment, watching the fierce protector in his eyes, a dangerous question bloomed in Ilara's mind. Were they really just pretending? The line between their cold, incalculated pact and this raw, undeniable connection was beginning to blur into nothing, terrifying her more than any enemy she had ever faced. This new, fragile understanding between them did not go unnoticed. A few days later, a young, ambitious warrior, eager to win the Luna's favor, approached Ilara in the training yard with a gift, a rare, white winter rose he had found growing in a sheltered ravine. As he offered it to her, a low, predatory growl echoed from across the yard. Kale stood there, having just finished a sparring session, his body coiled with a sudden, primal tension. His eyes were fixed on the warrior, a look of pure, undiluted possession in their icy depths. The young wolf froze, stammering an apology before practically fleeing. Ilara was left stunned, the rose in her hand forgotten. Kyle's jealousy was not that of a political ally. It was the raw, instinctual claim of a mate, an emotion neither of them was prepared to acknowledge. This kind of intense, slow-burn dynamic is something we, as a community of epic romance lovers, cherish. It reminds me of other stories on our channel, like the one where the Fey King and the human assassin were bound by a cursed treaty. Our most dedicated subscribers know that the most powerful alliances are often forged in the crucible of public pressure and private vulnerability. We are building a library of these epic tales together, and the story of Ilara and Kale is a powerful new chapter in that shared saga. Their journey from unwilling allies to something more is a testament to the kind of complex, high-stakes passion that defines the stories we explore here every week, creating a world we all get to be a part of. Ilara found herself thinking less and less of Silvermoon. Her quest for vengeance, once the only fire that kept her warm, now felt distant. Her waking thoughts were consumed by Winterfang, by the sickly grey of the Blight, by the stubborn hope in the eyes of its people, and by the complex, guarded Alpha who ruled it all. When she touched the earth now, it wasn't just a duty, it was a desperate fight for a home she was starting to feel was her own. She was healing his land, but it felt as though the land and its fierce protector were beginning to heal the broken parts of her. This realization was a terrifying vulnerability. To care for Kyle, to truly fight for his people, meant opening her heart again, a risk she had sworn she would never take. Just as a fragile truce seemed to settle over the court, the nobles found a new weapon to wield. Lord Valerius, though publicly shamed, was not defeated. He gathered the council elders and approached the throne during a formal session. An ancient, withered noble stepped forward as their spokesman, his voice thin but resonant with the power of tradition. "Alpha Kale," he began, his old eyes moving from Kale to Ilara. "Your union with the Luna has given us a sliver of hope, but the pact is incomplete. The ancient laws are clear. To truly and permanently bind her life-giving magic to the very soul of Winterfang, to secure our future against the blight and any other threat, the union must be consecrated. You must produce an heir. The council's demand fell into the throne room's silence like a guillotine blade. The fragile bridge of trust Ilara and Kale had painstakingly built over weeks of shared struggle and quiet moments was instantly incinerated. Kale's expression hardened. The flicker of warmth she had grown accustomed to seeing in his eyes extinguished, replaced by the glacial cold of the Alpha, who had first found her dying at his border. He didn't look at her. His gaze fixed on the elders as if she were no longer a person in the room, but simply the subject of a grim negotiation. For Ilara, the words were a physical blow, a brutal confirmation of her deepest fear. She was not his partner. She was not his Luna. She was a vessel, a broodmare, a biological tool whose ultimate purpose was to produce another, more perfect tool to save his kingdom. The humiliation was absolute, stripping her bare before the entire court. They walked back to their private chambers in a suffocating, charged silence. The moment the door to her room closed, the dam of her control broke. "Was this always part of the plan?" she demanded, her voice a low, trembling fury. Was the defense in the great hall, the shared meals, the illusion of partnership, was it all just a prelude to this? To maneuvering me into your bed to secure your bloodline? Kyle turned on her, his own control cracking under the strain, his face a mask of torment. "Do you think I wanted this?" he snarled, his voice a low growl that was more pain than anger. "Do you think I enjoy having my pack's fate dictated by ancient superstitions and the meddling of old men? This is not about what I want. It is about what Winterfang needs to survive. It has always been about that and nothing more." His words were a wall of ice between them, pushing her away, redefining their bond as nothing more than a desperate, clinical transaction once again. He saw the utter devastation in her eyes, and the muscle in his jaw clenched. He took a step closer, his voice dropping, the anger replaced by a raw, ragged desperation. "You don't understand," he rasped. "This isn't just the council's wish, it's a prophecy. The shamans found it etched in the Heartwood's oldest stone. It says the blight is a living curse that has bound itself to the soul of our land. Your magic can suppress it. Hold it at bay, but only for a time. The prophecy is clear, only a new life, an heir born of Winterfang's Alpha and the bearer of the Earth Song, can create a permanent anchor, a new heart for the land that will purge the poison forever. Without an heir, everything you are doing, all the strength you are pouring into the soil, it is all just a temporary reprieve. Within a generation, the blight will return, stronger than before, and consume everything." The confession hung in the air between them, a truth more devastating than any lie. It recast their entire situation, transforming it from a political crisis into an existential one. He had known this all along. The weight of this secret was what she had seen in his eyes on the battlements, the source of his solitary torment. He looked at her, the ruthless Alpha stripped away to reveal the desperate man beneath. "When I made this bargain, Ilara," he said, her name a rough whisper on his lips, "you were a solution, a weapon. But now, the thought of forcing this upon you, of demanding this sacrifice, it is a command I do not know how to give." In his admission, she heard the echo of an unspoken truth. Their pact was no longer just a pact. It had become something real, something that made this impossible demand a source of genuine agony for them both. "If you've made it this far, you're already part of this community. Subscribe so you don't miss a single story." She couldn't answer. The chasm that had opened between them was too vast, filled with the impossible weight of prophecy and the ghosts of their unspoken feelings. What could she say? To agree would be to surrender the last piece of herself, to become the very thing she was accused of being, a tool for his pack's salvation. But to refuse would be to condemn the people she had come to care for. the land she was pouring her very soul into, to a slow, agonizing death. There was no right answer, only varying degrees of sacrifice and loss. Without another word, she turned and retreated to the far side of her chamber, wrapping her arms around herself. He watched her for a long moment, his face a canvas of conflict and regret, before he finally turned and left, the soft click of the door sealing them both in their separate, silent hells. The fragile warmth they had discovered was gone, replaced by a cold more profound than any winter. Several days passed in a tense, unbearable quiet. They moved like ghosts around each other, the prophecy an unspoken wall between them. Ilara continued her work at the Heartwood, her efforts now feeling futile, a desperate attempt to delay an inevitable death. Then the summons came. Horns echoed through the stone fortress, calling every member of the Winterfang pack, warriors, nobles, families and elders, to a grand assembly in the throne room. A nervous energy crackled in the air as the massive hall filled with the low murmur of 1,000 whispered questions. Ilara was escorted to the dais by the Alpha's guard, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't know what he had decided. She took her place beside the empty ironwood throne, her eyes scanning the sea of anxious faces until she found him, standing in the shadows near the great doors. He met her gaze for a single, unreadable moment before striding forward to address his people, his decision a terrible, unknown weight about to fall upon them all. Kyle's gaze swept over the sea of tense, expectant faces, his people, his responsibility. He stood before them, not as a king on a throne, but as a wolf at a crossroads, the fate of his entire world resting on the words he was about to speak. The elders watched him, their expressions rigid with the weight of tradition and prophecy. Lord Valerius and his faction watched with a smug certainty, confident that their alpha would make the only logical choice for survival. Ilara watched him, her heart a stone in her chest, her expression a mask of stoic resignation, prepared for the final, ultimate betrayal. He drew a deep breath. The silence in the hall so profound it felt like the end of the world. His eyes found hers, holding them for a long, charged moment, and in that single look he made his decision, not for his pack, but for her. He finally spoke, his voice not a booming command, but a low, resonant declaration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain. "The council has spoken of prophecy," he began, his glacial eyes moving from the elders to the assembled pack. "They speak of duty, of sacrifice, and of an heir to save our lands. They are right to be afraid. They are right to seek a final answer to the curse that devours us. But they are wrong about the nature of the cure." He took a step away from the throne, moving to stand directly beside Ilara, a silent, unshakable wall of support. "They see a vessel for magic, a means to an end. But I see a queen who has bled for this land, who has poured her soul into our dying earth when we had all but given up hope. She is not our tool, she is our salvation." Then he turned to face her fully, ignoring the gasp that rippled through the crowd, in front of his entire pack, his council, and the ghosts of his ancestors. The ruthless Alpha of Winterfang laid his heart bare. "I reject the prophecy's terms," he stated, his voice raw with an emotion no one there had ever heard from him. "Odile, Winterfang will not be saved by a forced union or a child born of duty. I will not demand this sacrifice. I brought you here as a pawn in my war, Ilara, but you have become the very heart of it. Your strength, your fire, your refusal to break. You have healed more than just our soil. You have healed the broken spirit of this pack and of its alpha." He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw. "I choose you. Not the Earth Song, not the Luna of a pact. You, as my mate, my equal, my queen. If this land dies, it dies with us standing together." As his words echoed in the stunned silence, a profound shift occurred. The raw power of his confession, a love declared not in a whisper but as a defiant roar against fate, resonated with the ancient magic within her. The Earth Song surged, not as a controlled channel of power, but as a brilliant, untamable floodgate of life. A soft, emerald light emanated from Elara, pulsing in time with her heartbeat, spreading from her across the stone floor and up the cold, dark walls of the throne room. The air grew warm, thick with the scent of fresh rain and blooming flowers. The withered shamans fell to their knees, their eyes wide with awe. The prophecy had never been about a child. It was about a true union, a bond of souls powerful enough to create a new heart for the land and purge the poison forever. The light receded, leaving behind a palpable sense of peace and a renewed vitality in the very air they breathed. Kyle didn't seem to notice. His world had narrowed to the woman standing before him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. The weight of his dying kingdom, a burden he had carried in solitary agony for years, was finally lifted. He leaned down, and the kiss that followed was not a claim or a contract, but a surrender. It was a silent, reverent promise of a shared future, a tender and absolute devotion that sealed their fates more profoundly than any blood oath. The pack watched in stunned, reverent silence as their ruthless alpha and his outcast queen, in choosing each other, saved them all. The curse was broken not by magic, but by a love powerful enough to rewrite prophecy. Months later, sunlight streamed through the high windows of the throne room, illuminating a land reborn. The blight was a fading memory, replaced by a vibrant green that carpeted the valleys of Winterfang. Elara stood beside Kale, not as a consort, but as his co-ruler, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her stomach. The child she carried was not the product of a grim duty, but a symbol of their defiant love, a new beginning for a land and a pack that had been pulled back from the brink of extinction. The court that had once viewed her with suspicion now looked upon her with a fierce, protective loyalty. She was their healer, their queen, the heart of their world, and the beloved mate of the Alpha who had been wise enough to see the woman worth more than any kingdom. Their love story became a legend, a fire to warm the heart through the coldest winter. What began as a desperate bargain forged in betrayal and despair had bloomed into an unbreakable bond that healed a cursed land. They had been two lonely rulers, an emperor of a dying kingdom and a queen without a throne, each trapped in their own silent prison. In finding each other, they had not only saved their people, but had rescued their own souls from the solitude that had defined them. Their reign marked the dawn of a new era for Winterfang, one built not on conquest or fear, but on a foundation of unwavering partnership and a love that had proven stronger than any darkness, a testament to the idea that true power is found not in a crown, but in the hand you hold in the dark. A crown of ice, a heart of fire, a love that brought a dead world back to life. Their tale was whispered on the winter winds, a song of resilience and devotion. In the end, it was not magic that saved them, but the simple, terrifying, and beautiful choice to trust another's soul. This story ends, but there are many more waiting for you. Teaser. Next week, a Fey prince bound by an ancient, bloodthirsty curse will find his only hope in the human assassins sent to kill him. Dale, like if this story captivated you, subscribe for the next one. Comment on which moment impacted you the most, for in every ending, a new epic is waiting to be told.